Hello again. This is In Conservation With, a series of Zoom interviews with the movers and shakers of the conservation world. And there's no grander mover and shaker than my good friend, Mark Avery. You never had that introduction before, have you, Mark?
No, you're starting off very nice. Thank you, David.
um, just for people watching on YouTube in the future, please like and subscribe and tell your friends about all the stuff here on In Conservation With. There's so many different conversations. Tonight we're going to be talking, or today we're going to be talking about the state of conservation in the UK for wildlife, and we're talking with Mark Avery, who, for me, well, he's a campaigner, but I think is a conservationist. He's been around for a long time, like me, I suppose, but maybe a bit longer. He's an author, he's a blogger, he's a campaigner. He also says, and I believe him, he's a granddad, father and husband and son, and an opera fan and grower of tomatoes, and a former chair and trustee of the World Land Trust. And he also worked for the RSPB as a conservation director, which I think is when I first met you. Is that right?
Uh, I think we met before I was conservation director, but when I was at the RSPB, I think I was probably head of research at the time,
Okay.
probably.
Well, I actually can't remember when we first met, but you reminded me when we were just getting ready to press the record button of a fateful afternoon at the British Birdwatching Fair in Rutland in the late 90s. Do you want to embarrass me again?
No, go on. You embarrass yourself, David. I know this is something that niggles away at you because you usually bring it up whenever we meet.
Well, for those who don't know, which is most of you, because I don't talk to anyone else about it apart from Mark, every year there is, or used to be anyway, a competition which was the Bird Brain of Britain. And I used to enter. And I think Mark and I dueled against each other probably in the late 90s. And I think you beat me. And
I beat everyone. I
yeah,
won it.
you won it. Yeah. I didn't see anyone else. I just saw me and you, to be honest. You won it, and I was very irked and have been ever since. Um, but what I will say is that I actually did win it in 2019 eventually, by becoming a world expert for 2 weeks on sandgrouse as my chosen subject. And basically, that was great. Won it. So I feel a bit redeemed now. I feel better now.
I think that's good. You won it as a veteran. I won it as a kind of kid, really. So
Speaking of kid, I mean, look, you're in the world of conservation, even. Just sort of bring us up to speed in terms of how you first got involved in this world. I mean, as a child, were you interested in wildlife from a young age?
yeah, look, I think like many children, I was interested in wildlife from about the age of 5 that I can remember, maybe earlier. And my I lived in South Bristol and North Somerset, and my mum and dad were keen on going for walks, going to nice places on the holiday. So, but the countryside, the Lake District, mid Wales, places like that. And my dad would point out to me birds in particular. I don't think he got them all right. He wasn't a bird watcher, but I kind of went, oh, right, that's a kestrel, is it? Oh, that's a buzzard, is it? Um, and when I went to grammar school, Bristol Grammar School, there was a club that was really a bird watching club, but it called itself the Field Club because it pretended that we were interested in all aspects of natural history. And the two masters at school used to take a minibus load of kids out every other Sunday in term time and take us to Chew Valley Lake or Breen Down or Slimbridge. And I just got hooked on bird watching then because I was with a load of other teenage boys. Uh, who were very good and very keen. And so I was a bird watcher. And then I went to university, did science, biology at university. I got a job with the RSPB in 1986 as a scientist. There's a slightly strange story behind that. I was doing a bit of work for the Forestry Commission, doing a review of science on woodland birds. So I had this big box of papers that I had to read and make sense of. And one of them was a draft paper by Colin Bibby, who was head of research at the RSPB at the time. And I knew Colin a little bit. I was a bit scared of him because he was very clever. And I read this paper and I found a mistake in it. Well, at least I thought I found a mistake in it. So I phoned him up, because I think these were the days before email. So I had to phone him up. I phoned him up and said, Colin, I found a mistake in this paper that you've written. The paper hasn't come out yet, but, and he said, oh, well, you better come over and see me then. So I drove over to the lodge. We had a chat about this paper. He said, you're right, there is a mistake, which he had time to correct. So he was kind of quite pleased rather than really angry with me. And before I left, he said, so what are you doing this summer? I said, well, I think I'm going down to the Camargue to carry on studying European bee eaters, but I haven't got the money to do it yet. He said, oh no, we've got a job. Why don't you come and work for us? Work in the flow country in Caithness and Sutherland. So I went home and thought about it and said yes. So that's how I got into the RSPB, by finding a mistake in the work of my future boss. And I thought I'd stay at the RSPB for a few years doing research, then I'd go off somewhere else. And I stayed at the RSPB for 25 years, the last 12 and a half of which I was the conservation director. So that takes us up to 2011. And since then, I have written some books. I have done a bit of consultancy, but only with people I like and organizations that I believe in. So that rather limits how much money and how much work you can get. I have founded Wild Justice with two mates, Ruth Tingay and a bloke called Chris Packham. And I've done a few other things. So that's up to date. That's where I've come from wandering around, having birds pointed out to me by my dad, through science to, quite heavy conservation stuff.
Yeah, well, Mark, I always see you as someone who's very outspoken, who's not afraid to actually say things as it is. And you probably also have earned yourself a few enemies, but you know what they say, you can judge a person by their enemies. But before we talk about why you're here tonight, really, or today, which is to talk about the your book, which is called Reflections, What Wildlife Needs and How to Provide It. Can you just quickly tell us, just to get people to understand your kind of where you're coming from on this, your work with the grouse, red grouse, shooting, as well as how Wild Justice came to be?
All right. Well, the two things are linked. Well, red grouse, it's a native British species. It's the British and Irish race of a bird that's quite common around our latitude. It goes all the way around through Scandinavia and Russia and across Canada and bits of the USA. It's called different things in different places, but the race that occurs in the UK is the red grouse, and it's the one that you see on bottles of famous grouse whiskey. You'll start seeing those because they always have really good adverts running up to Christmas, don't they? So, like kind of like fox hunting, shooting red grouse is a very British, fairly traditional so-called sport. So people will pay a lot of money to shoot red grouse. And it means that you go to some nice places. So you go up into the North York Moors or the Peak District or bits of eastern Scotland, places like that where red grouse live. And you stand in a little shelter about the size of my office here, but not much bigger than me spreading my arms out. And there's a line of you who wait with your shotguns for something to happen. And in the distance, there's a line of poorer people who form a line and push the red grouse towards we rich people with our shotguns. And as the red grouse fly over our heads or past us, we shoot at them. And you do that 6 or 7 times during a day in different places. And people will pay thousands of pounds for that experience. I mean, not uncommonly £8,000 per person for a day's grouse shooting. So they expect to see quite a lot of red grouse and to be able to shoot at quite a lot of red grouse. So the moorlands where the red grouse live, because red grouse eat heather, are managed to be kind of perfect places for red grouse. So predators such as foxes and stoats and carrion crows are killed. That's legal, providing it's done in a legal way, killed by gamekeepers. There is medication put out, medicated grit, little trays of grit, because red grouse will eat grit. And if you coat it in medicine, it will clear out all the parasitic worms that might be in their guts. And the heather is burned because red grouse like eating young heather, but they like nesting and sheltering in old heather. So you need a mosaic of different ages and lengths of heather. So it's quite intensive management. So you could decide whether you like that business or not. Some people would be absolutely against it because it involves shooting a load of birds. And a lot of people would disagree with that and would certainly disagree that it's a sport. It involves killing lots of predators. It also involves a lot of carbon emissions because the peat dries out when you burn the vegetation off it. It involves increased flood risk, because burning the vegetation means that the water flows off the hills quicker, down the valleys, sometimes into people's living rooms. And another aspect of it is that it's not just legal predator control that happens, it's unlawful, illegal control. So birds like golden eagles, peregrines, and one of the most ace birds you can ever see, the hen harrier, they're bumped off pretty routinely on grouse moors, and that is illegal. It's been illegal since 1954, or maybe even longer than that. But you can actually look at the distribution of several of these species, and they're missing from the areas of intensive grouse shooting. So that's quite a long story, isn't it? But I decided in about 2014 that grouse shooting was so bad on so many levels that rather than negotiate with the grouse shooting industry, which I'd done quite a lot of while working for the RSPB and not got anywhere, rather than negotiating and trying to get small changes, we ought to campaign for a ban. Just say, this is hopeless. You can't tinker with this to make it acceptable. We'd all be better off if you got rid of it. So a campaign for banning driven grouse shooting was something I started. I think there have been 2 petitions to the UK Parliament which have passed 100,000 signatures. Nothing has happened in England, really. The Labour Party is signed up to licensing of grouse shooting. So who knows, in about a year's time, things might change. But in Scotland, there has been change to the legislation that grouse shooting will be licensed and burning heather will be licensed. And that's progress. I say in this book that we might talk about, that's quite rapid progress, actually. I mean, it feels to me, and it probably feels to other people, like I've been banging on about this for ages and ages and ages. But actually, it's about 9 years. And to have got that far in 9 years is not bad. Progress is slow unless you're going to mount a revolution. Democratic change is quite slow. So that's the thing about grouse shooting. And there's a good book about it. There's a book I wrote about it. This came out in 2015. It's called Inglorious, because up until the publication of this book, the opening of the grouse shooting season on the 12th of August was known as the Glorious 12th. There are rather more people these days who call it the Inglorious 12th. And Ruth Tingay and Chris Packham and I kind of worked together on that campaign. And we got closer and closer together, became friends, worked on more things. And that is how Wild Justice came about, because we thought, well, we could do more if we formed an organisation which could receive money, do campaigning, and was a legal entity. And so we are coming up fairly soon in October to the 5th anniversary of us founding Wild Justice, but nobody noticed we were there until February 2019, when we burst onto the scene with a legal challenge against the general licenses, and Chris had dead crows and badgers pinned to his gate and and death threats and all sorts of other things. So that's the answer to those two questions, I hope.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good background. I mean, we're going to get on. I'm going to get on to questioning or talking about the government and all those horrible things that have happened in terms of, you know, the threatening behavior that some people have, you know, put towards conservationists. But let's actually go to the broad question, which really is a question that should be asked at the end, but I want to ask it now. Firstly, in your view, and obviously reflecting what's in your book, what is conservation? What does that mean to you? And what is your view of conservation in this country, in the UK?
Okay.
Very broad question.
So, well, no, it's a good question. That's why chapter 3 in the book is what is conservation, because you hear it being bandied around and people saying that they're conservationists. Neither kind of definition, really. I mean, everybody could make up their own definition, but I would say that wildlife conservation is to do with maintaining and enhancing the numbers and range of natural native species and habitats. That'll do. So if wildlife is going down in numbers and found in fewer and fewer places, conservation isn't really working. If it's being maintained, and if some of the species that have and habitats that have declined are making a recovery, then conservationists are doing a good job. So, as we said, I worked for the RSPB for 25 years, and there was less wildlife in the UK at the end of that 25 years than there was at the beginning. So we haven't done a brilliant job as a country. You can't blame the RSPB for not being in control of all nature, but we haven't done a brilliant job as a country in preserving something that a lot of us think is important, but not everybody thinks that wildlife is important. We tend to assume that everybody loves the sound of a skylark and are going out to look at the red admirals on the ivy in their garden or down the road, or, you know, visiting a nature reserve to look at the flowers. They're not. Most people don't pay that much attention. So I think we have to realize that we're a bit of a niche interest. But what was your second question? Your second question was, what is the state of
Yeah, what's your
conservation?
view? What is your personal view of the state of conservation in in the UK?
Uh, the that there are two main classes of player in nature conservation. One is the government and its agencies, and the other is wildlife charities like the Wildlife Trusts and the RSPB and the Woodland Trust and all those. We tend to think about the charities quite a lot, and that's fair enough. But the state ought to be doing more. I mean, the government, the people we elect to Parliament, ought to be doing more to conserve and enhance wildlife around us. They all say that they're going to, and none of them really pull their finger out and do it. So they can't really mean it. And we shouldn't let them off the hook, really. We should be a bit more demanding. And what we ought to demand from government is that it spends more money on nature conservation. Now, I know everybody wants more money spent on whatever they're interested in. And spending a few, let's say, spending an extra £1 billion a year on wildlife conservation in the UK, that sounds like a lot of money. It's a drop in the ocean compared with what other government departments spend. I mean, you could make your own choices, but to get that £1 billion a year, and I think £1 billion a year would be a bit cheap, really. I think we ought to ask for more. But £1 billion a year, you could give me. Let me have a look at the defence budget, and I'll put a line through a few things. I'd protect the NHS, probably. I think. Might have a look at MPs' salaries, but that wouldn't get us very far towards that £1 billion. I think HS2 wouldn't have started it, probably, and I certainly wouldn't have let everybody wreck the countryside and then stop. We're getting the worst of both worlds.
Well, what we're talking about here is basically if you had a political party and you were in power, and this is how it looked like.
Yeah, but that's never going to happen. So,
but just say it did. Just say it did. Just say you are.
Yeah. I think the realistic way of looking at it is, let's imagine that you or I was the prime minister. We'd have a load of other things to deal with, and you couldn't just go, well, I'm going to make sure that there are more skylarks when I leave office than when I came in. And, well, the health service and education and defence and road building and everything else can go hang itself because I'm just going to concentrate on skylarks. That isn't going to happen. But what we need to do as voters is to try and get more of the cake and more of the attention and more brain power put on spending money wisely on wildlife conservation. And I think that's entirely possible, as I say in the book. But the other bit of it is the wildlife charities that we're all members of. So I'm a member of the RSPB. I'm a member of the Wildlife Trust. I'm life members of both of them. I've been members of practically everything else at one stage or other in my life. They're the people who ought to be putting these messages to government. The point of they ought to be more campaigning, and we're maybe seeing some of that happen now.
Yeah.
I'm quite impressed by the Wildlife Trusts at the moment. They seem pretty outspoken. I mean, the RSPB had their liars moment on Twitter, where they posted that picture of Sunak Gove and coffee with a big liars across it, but they haven't taken it down, but they apologized for it pretty soon afterwards. I think a load of people were cheering them on when they saw that. They went, oh, amazing. The OSPB has been outspoken, but just being rude to politicians doesn't necessarily persuade them, does it? Mobilising the voters will persuade them.
Yeah,
and if the OSPB and the Wildlife Trust have got 1 million members each, let's get on with seeing them being mobilised, I'd say.
yeah, but do you not think that in defence of the NGOs you've mentioned and others, do you not think that they are afraid that if they start rocking boats, then some of their members might be falling off the boat into the sea?
I think they are afraid. I think they're afraid of everything. I think they are scared of their own shadows. They've got a job to do. I'd like to see them be a bit feistier about doing it. This is, I mean, it's better in Wales and it's a bit better in Scotland. But in England, the administration we've got in charge of wildlife conservation is awful. I mean, because we've had a Conservative or coalition government since 2011, there are quite a lot of young people. I regard almost everybody as young these days, but there are quite a lot of young people who can't remember that things used to be better than this. They were better under Brown and Blair, even though I don't think either of them had a decent pair of binoculars or could probably tell a bar-tailed godwit from a black-tailed godwit. I'm pretty sure neither of them be able to do that. And it was actually better under Major and Thatcher than it has been in the last few years. This is a partly party political point I'm making, but not wholly. We have had a terrible government for the last decade or more. And we've lost a lot of time and we haven't done enough for wildlife, despite lots of promises.
Why are they so disinterested? Why are they so cut off from this whole idea of the environment?
I think I'd just get rude about Conservative politicians if I tried to answer that question.
Well,
but I think we bear some of the responsibility. We as individuals and voters need to be much more vocal to politicians about what we want, and the wildlife charities that we support by giving them our money ought to be much more vocal on our behalf. I mean, when I was conservation director of the RSPB, which was pretty much entirely during a Labour government, and we didn't think that Labour government was that brilliant when they were in power, but they looked pretty good compared with looking back on them. They looked pretty good. But when I used to go into a room to meet a cabinet minister or a whole load of civil servants, they thought, and I kind of thought, that I had 1 million people behind me because the RSPB's got 1 million members. And that's what politicians were kind of interested in, because none of the political parties had a membership remotely like that. Our NGOs have to use that power more. I mean, I really think they do, because we keep being told we're in a wildlife crisis, which we are. Well, let's act as though we're in a crisis. Let's get serious about it.
It's interesting because, we have, as you say, a government that doesn't really care or seem to care. And we have, I'm going to sit on the fence or even play devil's advocate on the behalf of the NGOs, because I'm thinking to myself, they obviously want change, but do you think that change? I mean, I spoke about this the other day regarding the State of Nature report for 2023. We had Professor Richard Gregory here from the RSPB talking about that particular project, that report, and I was left feeling that, okay, fine, we've outlined what's happening, and yes, there is a possibility of reversing some things, but it seems now, and I put this point to him actually, it seems now that we have a situation where if you stand up and say anything regarding protection of the environment or conservation, you're automatically labeled as an terrorist of some sort. And your friend and mine, Chris Packham, more your friend, obviously, had a program on TV recently where he pondered about the idea of committing an offense, of breaking the law, because he felt that up until now, as you've just said, we've tried all these things. We've talked, we've been to meetings, we've had demonstrations, we've been very peaceful about it all, and nothing much has happened. In fact, the wildlife has decreased, continued to free fall. So he was putting out the idea of breaking the law. Now, we have a situation where we have organizations. The most prominent, I suppose, is the Just Stop Oil people, who are really on the sharp end of activism. Do you think that that's what's needed to make things change? Do you think that the NGOs need to sort of merge into a bit of that themselves to get, like the RSPB putting up that tweet, proclaiming that Sunak and co are liars? But do we need much more of that to start moving forward? I mean, would you break the law yourself?
I don't know. I have thought about it. I thought that program of Chris's was brilliant, because I think he talked about some of the issues that many of us have thought about. And he didn't come down on one side or the other. He talked about the issues. You could see that he was a bit leaning towards, yeah, maybe I ought to, maybe we ought to, but he wasn't saying, yeah, what we've got to do is go out and break the law. And no, I don't think the National Trust, Wildlife Trust, and the RSPB ought to turn into Just Stop Oil. I noticed that Just Stop Oil seem to be losing some fairly prominent supporters at the moment, but that doesn't mean they should remain so quiet and so apparently, what is the right way to put it? Because they're clearly not satisfied with the situation, but they're not making enough noise about it, and they're not behaving as though there is a crisis, and they're not putting forward big workable solutions to government. So I think they do need to up their game. I think breaking the law as a protest is a very fine thing to do. I'm not sure I would be brave enough to do it, actually. But there's a long history of people breaking the law to get social change. Suffragettes, good example. But they didn't break the law clandestinely. They did it openly and to make a point. And they were prepared to suffer the consequences of breaking the law. It's not like it's not like shoplifting type breaking the law where you're trying not to get caught. If Chris Packham ever breaks the law as part of a campaign, I am absolutely sure he'll do it with a television camera pointing at him and with a little speech to explain what he's doing and why. And if he or you, David, or I were to break the law under those circumstances, we should take the consequences. But it's quite a brave thing to do. It's not like nicking sweets from a sweet shop. That is a fine form of protest.
Yeah, I mean, just for those who don't know about the Chris Packham thing, in fact, if you don't even know who Chris Packham is, because you might be from somewhere else in the world, he's probably our most prominent conservationist, nature, wildlife broadcaster working with the BBC, and very, very outspoken. One of the few in his position, actually, as far as I'm concerned, putting his head above the parapet and putting his neck on the line, basically, most of the time. I watched that program where he kind of talked about the idea of pushing things further to make a point, because we've actually not really got that far yet. And I actually, it's a difficult one. I think that I'm worried that people, i.e., people in the government, the general public, because you mentioned it yourself, people like Just Stop Oil are losing favor now because of some of the stuff they've been doing. I mean, I think they're aiming at the wrong people, not at the general public. Should be at the corporations and the people in power. But I'm worried that any kind of conservation activity is going to be viewed as some sort of radical behavior by tree huggers. Do you kind of share that view? Do you think that they are sort of muddying the waters for the people like, I suppose, you and I, for want of a better sort of collection of people?
Well, I share the view that, and this was enunciated pretty well in Chris's program, that Just Stop Oil may be targeting the wrong people and annoying those voters who have to look at the world in a slightly different way in order to engineer change. But if we really believe that we're in a crisis for wildlife and a crisis for the climate, and that what we're doing at the moment isn't solving things, we've got to up our game. And so we've got to choose the ways to up our game. And in a democracy, we've only got a few ways of doing it. Change the government, change the politicians, could have a revolution. Fancy starting a revolution, David? I don't think I'd be very good at it. The types of things I've done are speak to people, write books. Couldn't be anything much more middle class than writing some books. Start some petitions, very venerable way of trying to influence government. Doesn't influence them immediately, very quickly, but it goes back to the Magna Carta, the ability of the people to put forward their views to, it was the king at the time, but now to Parliament. And Wild Justice has taken legal action against government and government agencies to try to uphold existing laws and prevent those who actually created those laws from breaking them. So I don't think I'm an eco-zealot. I'm a kind of educated middle-class troublemaker, really. Books, petitions, speeches, legal cases, that type of thing. I'm not sure that will be enough, but that's a lot further than most of our wildlife NGOs are going.
Why?
And they've got the power. They've got
Yeah.
the power to mobilize, allegedly, 1 million people if you are boss of the RSPB. So let's see them mobilized. I'm one of them. I'm waiting to be mobilized. Please mobilize me.
Why are the general public so apathetic? Is it because, as you mentioned earlier, and I've had experience of this myself, where you put together a petition, you get over the mark where people need to stand up and talk about it, i.e. the politicians, and they choose to ignore it? Do you not think that people kind of think, well, what's the point? What can I do? I sign a petition, nothing happens. What more can I do?
I think they do a bit. But that's because they haven't been told how the world really works by those NGOs. If you think that signing a petition is immediately going to turn the world around in the way you want it to be changed, I don't know which planet you're living on, really, because it doesn't happen that quickly. Our NGOs have to educate people and bring them along, or they could simply read this book, which does some of it for you, because that part of that is an analysis of what we need to do to up our game. But there are lots of different ways of upping our game, but we need to. I mean, let's just leave, I'm going to keep reiterating that point. What we're doing at the moment is not solving the wildlife crisis. So we've got to do something more and different.
Okay.
So what is it?
All right,
Here's
before
my
we,
this is this is my recipe for what it is. Uh,
okay, we're gonna
what's
find
everybody
out.
else's?
We're gonna find out what you think we should be doing. Well, let's actually rewind a bit, and let's just talk about how much has life changed? How much has the wildlife in Britain changed? When was the zenith? When was the time when it was all beautiful and land of milk and honey and all that sort of stuff? And what's happened since?
Uh, I don't. I think it, I don't think it ever was that land of milk and honey and everything was fine. Um, so I am. How old am I? I'm 65. I'll be 66 next spring.
You look good.
I don't know, not compared with you, but then you're just a kid, David. We all know that. Um, but there were a lot more birds and wildlife in farmland when I was growing up, living on the south side of Bristol, than there are now. And that's a generation. Well, it's kind of two generations because I am a grandfather. So my kids have grown up and they've lived through declines in wildlife, and my 2.5-year-old grandson um, is keen on wildlife. He particularly likes crows, which is good. Crows need more friends. Um, but he's growing up in a countryside that is much less rich in wildlife than his grandparents, including me as one of them, grew up. So there's no doubt that things have changed, and that's due to intensive agriculture. So we need agriculture has been very successful in producing food, but it's also produced pollution. It's produced a loss of wildlife. It's produced um, a loss of carbon in soils. But that's because you don't get paid by the market for those things. You get paid for producing a product that you sell to food producers and supermarkets. So that's why government has to intervene. This is kind of easy politics, really, the understanding how the world works. If you're a farmer, if you love wildlife to bits, you might do a little bit for wildlife on your farm. Some farmers do a lot, but you don't get paid for that, really. You lose money if you help wildlife. We need to intervene to make sure that farmers who produce lots of wildlife, store lots of carbon, reduce flood risk, that they don't lose too much money. Probably don't lose any money would be better. So, and how do you do that? You can either go around talking to every farmer in the country, which is a big job and won't work, or you look at the system that exists at the moment where we have spent £3 billion a year on farming grants and subsidies during a period when wildlife has declined in the countryside. We should spend that £3 billion a year better.
People talk about farming, and I get the impression that farmers often feel straight away they're on the back foot when you start talking about them and conservation. So are you saying that it's not all that bad, or should I say not all farmers are bad? It's
Well, not
more case
definitely
of
not all farmers are bad. It's like not all conservationists are good. I mean, I work for the RSPB, mate. It's not all black and white where I've worked. It's shades of grey, and that's what I think the world is like. Really, there are no wholly good or wholly bad people. So there are lots of good farmers, but you can't get away from the fact that 70% of the land area of the UK is farmed. And if you look at it's only last week, isn't it? Last week or the week before, the State of Nature report, farmland has lost kind of more wildlife than any other habitat. And that is true of the previous State of Nature report as well. This is not, news, new news. This is old news. And that's one reason probably why there's not enough action on it. People go, oh yeah, I've heard about that. Yeah, well, we know about that, but instead of doing something about it, they do something else, often nothing. You got to change the system, and that is what politics is about. I know some people think that nature conservation's nothing to do with politics. It's all about politics, which I don't mean is one party is always the best party and you should always vote for them. But it's definitely about politics because it's about how you want the world to be. It's about politics, just like gender equality is about politics. You have to change the system to make it fairer. It's like how much help people get when they're out of work is about politics. You can decide that there ought to be a safety net which catches people so that they don't fall too far, or you can decide, nah, let them get on with it. It's all about what you want the world to look like. And obviously they're competing demands. But nature conservation has to be about politics because so much of the issues, so many of the issues are determined by what governments and agencies do and how much they spend, to return to that, how much they spend on different issues. So I'm having a few nuclear submarines swimming around the world's ocean is a choice. You could have spent all that on farming instead. Now, we could have a debate. I'm not very well prepared for that debate about whether we should spend money on nuclear submarines and missiles or on redressing the loss of wildlife in the countryside, but I'd quite like issues like that to come forward.
Okay. I mean, obviously there's been a lot of negativity regarding the state of our wildlife in the UK, the state of nature, the state of environment. But you have said in your book that there has been some successes.
Yeah, there's a whole chapter, isn't there? Chapter 4. It's all to do with conservation successes. And I spell out, I think, about 18 of them. You could have written a whole book. In fact, you could have written a whole load of volumes of books about conservation successes. There are loads of them out there. And they go from things like changing agriculture policy, which has changed quite a lot in the last 30 or 40 years. It's better now than it was, but it's not good enough, to the introduction of marine protected areas in the last 12, 13 years or so, down to some very simple things like all of us leaving a bit more grass growing unmown in our gardens. No mow May, or maybe no mow May, June and July. There are loads of things that work. And the message we should take from that is that we should do more of the things that work. That'd be good. We'd have more wildlife. If we know that they work, let's do more of them. How are we going to do more of them? We'd have to spend more money on them. We could do other things as well. We can change policy. We could have new laws. But if we just did a shed load more of the things that we know that work, that would work pretty well. I think we would have to have some legislative change as well. But then we've been doing that for decades too, bit by bit, not enough and not quickly enough.
Yeah, you talked about offsetting things as well in terms of you actually sort of considering losing something to gain something else in terms of species, and which made me kind of think about species reintroductions as a way of tackling the loss, as it were. And the classic reintroduction in terms of species that have been talked about for decades now, bears, wolves, and lynx. Do you think that by their introduction, it could also help mitigate the problems we're having now regarding, parts of the biodiversity just collapsing?
In many ways, it's a great thing that we've got the English Channel separating us from all those French people on the other side. But if it didn't exist, the lynx and the wolves would be over here under their own steam, and you wouldn't have to think about this. I think you've got a bit. I don't think we'll see bears back in the UK for quite a long time, but I think you've got a bit far anyway. We ought to be having lots more pine martens. Pine martens are making a bit of a recovery, and they're a great example that when pine martens are allowed to live or reintroduced somewhere, then pine marten numbers go up, which is good because they're terrific. Grey squirrel numbers go down, which is good because they're a non-native species. And although they're very cute, they have a bit of a problem in that they compete with and give diseases to our native red squirrel. So what happens if you get an increase in pine martens is that grey squirrel numbers go down and red squirrel numbers go up. So you have pine martens and red squirrels and fewer grey squirrels. I think that's just a brilliant story, which isn't a made up story. It's a story that is well established in fact and has been seen in Scotland, north of England and Ireland, and there's evidence for it in Wales now as well. We're a bit too nervous about re-establishing things. We think that putting things back to a time before we can remember is such a dangerous thing to do. Well, it's not really. I mean, pine martens and red squirrels will get on fine together. They have done for thousands and thousands of years. They are doing in thousands and thousands of places on the continent of Europe. They will do here, and you won't have grey squirrels either. There's a lesson. It's a great story, and there's a lesson to be learned from that you can't often go wrong by re-establishing nature. And I think that's why rewilding, although what is rewilding, it means different things to different people, but rewilding, getting habitats back that are self-functioning, that have some of those top predators, is a good idea. That doesn't mean that we should rewild every wheat and barley and bean and oilseed rape field across the whole of southern England. We ought to rewild our uplands because they don't produce much food. They could produce a lot more nature. And that's one of the propositions in this book. Did I mention the book? I think I mentioned it once, maybe. But the case for rewilding and some of those reintroductions is made in the book.
In your book, am I right in assuming, or I got the feeling that when it comes to extinction rates or the rate of extinction, you were a bit skeptical about some of the figures there? Am I right in assuming that from what I read?
I am a bit. I mean, well, depends how one uses them. So this figure that the UK is one of the most nature depleted countries in the world. In fact, it's supposed to be the 7th worst I've seen said. Well, that might be true, but it depends how you look at the figures. And the reason that we're so bad in that regard is that we don't have many high mountains. So you can live anywhere in the UK almost, apart from the top of the Cairngorms and Ben Nevis. You can grow things almost everywhere in the UK, even if it's conifer plantations. So everywhere is farmed or forested. And we've got one of the highest population densities in the world, one of the highest population densities in the world. So there's an awful lot of concrete that's been poured. I think I used the example of Bournemouth. I suspect Bournemouth is okay, but Bournemouth exists on an area that was all lowland heathland when Thomas Hardy was writing his novels. And I don't think we're going to get rid of Bournemouth and turn it back into native heathland, lowland heathland. So you can just forget the idea that we're going to return large amounts of the UK land area to natural habitats. We're not. So just get over that bit and let's deal with the things that we can do.
Is there
And
one?
well, I suppose the other point is the situation is bad enough without having to exaggerate it to make it seem even worse than it is. It's pretty shocking if you just take a sane, sensible look at it. Let's not over egg things.
So I guess, you know, you don't want to, as you say, over egg a lot of people's eco anxieties, because obviously it's pretty bad as it is, as you rightly say. Um, is there one sort of major thing that you may not have mentioned today that we can do to help kind of reverse the situation we're in? And is this one thing transferable across the globe?
Uh, we can look at our own lifestyles. So fly less, eat less meat, get your energy from renewable sources. Don't buy any new clothes. Can see you haven't bought any new clothes for a while, David. Neither have I. It's all old stuff I'm wearing. It's got holes in most of it. We can do all that, but that's not going to make a massive difference on its own. So what we have to do is to get mass movement on things. And that does mean persuading governments to do different things. And you can't persuade government on your own, but by gathering together, and we're already gathered together because the RSPB's got 1 million members and the Wildlife Trust has got 1 million members. By gathering together and getting those bodies to put pressure on decision makers to do more of the right things, like in chapter 4 of the book, and fewer of the wrong things, we can make quicker progress. Is it going to be easy? No, it's not. It's going to be difficult. Is it going to be immediate? No, because we should have started 30 years ago. Some of us did. Many of us didn't, but some of us did. But we've got to change, and we've got to put more effort into wildlife conservation and stopping global emissions and stopping pollution and all those things. Otherwise, my grandson, and I've got 2 more grandchildren who are supposed to arrive this very month, are going to be living in a much worse world than me as their grandpa grew up in.
What's your favourite bird, Mark?
It's either roseate tern or hen harrier, depending on what mood I'm in and how recently I've seen either of them.
And if you could be anywhere in the world, where would you be right now?
Well, it's a bit dark in this country at the moment. Well, this will surprise you, I think, because there's nothing much to do with wildlife, and you have to give me a carbon neutral way of getting there. But I would like to be in Cordoba, outside the cathedral, which is kind of built over the old mosque in Cordoba, sitting in the courtyard where listening to the water running in the irrigation channels and looking at I think they're orange trees that grow there. And you will see a few birds, white storks, lesser kestrels, things like that. It's one of the most peaceful places I know, and the building is just fantastic. I would like to be there. And if you were there too, David, we could go into a bar, have some tapas, and have a fino of sherry or something like that.
Well, funny enough, I was actually in Cordoba 2 months ago. Beautiful place, and I would gladly join you for that. If you were there. Zoomers, just to let you know that we have a few more in conservation weeks coming up, talking about topics ranging from the secrets of bird molt, all the way through to well, actually, what is the Loch Ness monster if it does exist? We're going to be talking about cryptozoology as well. So we've got loads of things coming up. Keep an eye out even on the website, theunburdenworld.com, for the list of people to be spoken to and spoken with even. And also, as I say, if you like this, please subscribe and like it and tell your friends. Mark, thank you. It's been a very engaging conversation, and I think we just scratched the surface as ever when we get together.
Thank you. It's been fun.
And Zoomers also, I'd like to thank you all for joining us. And as I always say, be careful out there, but also keep looking up.